A very good evening to everyone present here. I, Ishika Kadyan, on behalf of the English Association and Women Development Cell of Atmaram Sanatan Dharm College, welcome you all to this insightful talk on the topic Smashing the Patriarchy, Exploring the Psyche of Modern Indian Women. We're extremely honored to have with us Ms. Sindhu Rajasekaran, an esteemed filmmaker and author of Smashing Patriarchy. I request Dr. Shivani Kukan to say a few words.
Good evening, everybody. A warm welcome on a sunny but cold January day, especially to our speaker, Sindhu Rajasekaran, for coming on board to share her thoughts. To my colleagues, especially from other colleges who've joined, dear students from ARSD and outside. The title of today's talk is Smashing the Patriarchy, Exploring the Psyche of the Modern Indian Woman. Um, it's a talk of great relevance to students who are pursuing English because feminism as a theory, as an approach to analyze a text, is something we constantly engage in. Those who are members of the Women's Development Cell, especially there would be many who have just joined. I hope this talk, which is actually preceding your orientation talk, will maybe nudge open a journey of self-discovery in terms of gender and gender issues. I see feminism as a dialogue, an ongoing one between the past and the present, between the different isms, Marxism, structuralism, post-structuralism, post-colonialism, different genders between feminist and post-feminist. So I hope this talk would initiate not just a dialogue about feminisms, but also compel us to revisit, question, examine our own views, because feminism is nothing but dynamic, ever changing. And if you are a feminist, there is only one thing you would absolutely believe in, that all voices need to be heard, always. With this, I invite Ishika to please introduce our speaker. Thank you, Ishika.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Before moving ahead with the session, I would like to take a few minutes to introduce our guest speaker, Ms. Sindhu Rajasekaran. She is a multifaceted personality. She has had diverse interests and experiences and many achievements in her literary as well as filmmaking career. She is a literary nomad and transgressor of genres. Her debut novel, Kaleidoscopic Reflections, was nominated for the Crossword Book Award. It told the tale of an intercaste Tamil family. Her collection of short stories, So I Let It Be, explored love, loss, and female sexuality. Her latest book of non-fiction about Indian feminism is titled Smashing the Patriarchy, a guide for 21st century Indian women, published by the reputed Elf Book Company. Originally trained as an electronics and communications engineer in India, Ms. Rajasekaran graduated with a master's in creative writing from the University of Edinburgh. Currently, she is a PhD researcher at the University of Strathclyde and a recipient of Dean's Global Research Studentship Award, where she is researching queer South Asian pasts. Ms. Rajasekaran's poetry has appeared in the Canadian anthology Very Much Alive and The Dance of the Peacock. Her creative nonfiction stories and essays have been published by several international magazines. A woman with many avatars, Ms. Rajasekaran is also a filmmaker and a communication strategist. She produced a critically acclaimed Indo-British feature film Ramanujan in 2014, which won the Best Production Award at Norway's NTFF. Interested in futuristic technologies and their potential to revolutionize businesses, she has helped various organizations modernize their communications and tell their stories better. Over the years, she is variously called India, Canada, and the UK home. I now invite her to enlighten us with her words of wisdom and knowledge.
I'll just interrupt you for a minute. All while you're listening to her talk, whatever queries, questions, observations you have, please do write them in the chat box. They will be taken up at the end of the talk. Thank you. Sindhu, please.
Thank you, Shivani, and thank you, Ishika, for that introduction. I think first, I want to start with what Shivani had just said about how it's important for every voice to be heard. I think that was the sort of crux of me writing this book, right? So when I started writing it, I wondered, should I just, interview women who identify as feminists? So who is a feminist, right? That was the first thing that was in my head. So what I went about doing was that I did not interview women who just call themselves feminists. So I mean, patriarchy affects all of us, whether we call ourselves feminists or not, right? So what I went about doing is interviewing all sorts of women, whether they call themselves feminists or not, or use that language or not. And I realized that, all women smash the patriarchy one way or another. So one of the main things that I do in my book is that to sort of decolonize our own mentalities, right? According to some historians, they say that during the colonial period, so the British sort of constructed this narrative of the collective of Indian women being victims, so they could sort of intervene in native affairs more. So which sort of erased our histories, because Indian women have challenged the patriarchy individually and collectively for generations. Our foremothers have done it for so many years, right? We have our foremothers were artists, they were singers, dancers, farmers, queens, warriors, architects. We've forgotten about all that. We just think of Indian women, the identity of Indian woman equals victimhood, right? And especially in the West, they think of third world women as victims, like we need to be rescued. That's how they see it. So they completely erase our agency historically and in the present. So the main thing in my book is that's why I call it smashing the patriarchy, is that to explore how women smash the patriarchy. So the book does not approach feminism or women's rights or women's issues from the point of victimhood. It looks at it from the point of power. So the lens of power. So that's how I look at it. So how do women take the power? How do women own their power? And what is women's power? So that is what my book explores. And that's how I want people to read it from the point of view of power, right? So I'm obviously for equal rights, like all genders are equal, but this book is for women, like it says on the cover, and I look at women's power. So that's very important to remember while you're reading this. So I wanted to talk about like how I introduce the thing, and then I'll go into each chapters. So I don't want to give you jargon, I'm not going to give you statistics, because all that is in the book. So if you want numbers, you could just go into the book and read that. But I'll just give you a crux of what the book is about, so then we can discuss and you can have questions. And I'd love to have discussions, because I think that's the best part about feminism, right? That we need to talk about more things. So first of all, I think what I explore is the three Fs. Gender theorist Stephanie Gens called it the three Fs. So that's feminism, femininity, and femaleness. So I wanted to explore what these three words mean to different women. So we all don't agree on what the definition of feminism is, or what femininity is, or what even femaleness constitutes, right? So I wanted to explore that and expand it and see how we all perform these three Fs. So why I call it performance is there is this philosopher called Simone de Beauvoir, who's a French philosopher, and she said that femininity is a performance, right? So that's what started the whole theory of the gender theory, of which Judith Butler later, is a pioneer in that, to talk about how as women we are constantly transforming. It's not like one identity that you're a woman, it's like equal to femaleness, equal to femininity. That's not what it is. So it's a constantly changing set of parameters. What it means to be a woman is a constantly shifting sort of a thing. So I explored that a lot in the book, of what it means to be a woman. So for me, trans women are women. Anybody who identifies as a woman is a woman. It is so important to expand the definition of woman, right? It is not equal to if you're born with female genitalia, that makes you a woman. That's not the case. As a queer woman myself, it's so important for me to look at how gender is a spectrum, how sexuality is a spectrum, and how we need to explore that. So one of the other themes of the book is to explore sexuality, explore gender, to expand it, to open up the bounds, right? Open up the boundaries. So to smash the patriarchy, it is so important to question what gender is, question what sexuality is, question what the identity of woman is. That's one of the things that led me to think a lot about femininity. because obviously, I think over all these years, because we wanted to sort of be equal in this hyper-masculine patriarchal world, like we've sort of, made to erase what femininity is. And femininity is in our heads equal to sort of submissive attitudes. It's equal to all these sort of regressive things is what we think. It's like, being hypersexualized, all those things. But that's something that the patriarchy has created, honestly, because for the hyper-masculine patriarchy to exist, it needs to make femininity the other. It needs to make it the inferior, right? So we need to question what femininity is as well, because femininity is not just for women. Femininity is for all genders. People of all genders have femininity, but it's sort of not respected in the hypermasculine world. So all the things that are feminine, like intuition, compassion, kindness, collaboration, all these aspects are not respected in a patriarchal world, because you need to be hypermasculine to survive here, right? So what has happened is that femininity has been othered, first of all, and only the feminine traits that helps the sort of patriarchy to exist, to sort of pigeonhole women and to use their sexuality for patriarchal purposes, that femininity is okay. So to be hyper feminine in a sexualized way, that's okay. But it does not allow women or people of any gender to be feminine in any other way, which might challenge the patriarchy. So I really look at what femininity means in the book. I've asked so many women and so many queer folks about what that word means to them, how they perform it in their lives, and I think I've recorded that in various chapters. And it's fascinating to see how this plays out, not just in, like, say, your your love life or your personal life or your sexual life. It is also to do with in your work life. It is also to do with just in how society sees you and how, what your place is in society. So I don't go in a very sort of what would you say, in a traditional way of like pigeonholing these things as this. So I try to put it through in all these different aspects of our lives. So how I've looked at so before I go into that, one more thing I want to say is that the most important thing for me as a feminist, as a woman, is to listen to all different viewpoints, right, of different women. So it's not to say that my book is not about, okay, if you're a feminist, you have to do these things, and if you don't do this, you're not a feminist. It's not about telling you who is not a feminist. That's not what this book is about. It's about exploring various women's points of views and their subjectivities and their individuality, because often we all need to understand that all of our politics, our feminist politic or any ideology, comes from our positionality, right? Our identities, our positionality in society, all that forms our individual politics, our individual struggles, resistance. All that comes from where we are. Obviously we can read a lot, we can understand the larger issues, but ultimately we are only speaking for ourselves, because you cannot appropriate another person's struggle. That person is the best person to speak about their own struggle, right? So I also happen to be intercaste. I'm part Dalit and part Iyengar. So that gives me the sort of perspective, which is like a sort of outcast perspective because of my intercaste identity. I'm not either. So obviously, for most Dalit, radical Dalits, I'm too Brahmanized, and for Brahmins, obviously I'm Dalit. So I'm not either. Like I'm like outcast pretty much. And the thing is, I try not to appropriate anybody's struggles. So because of my intercaste identity, I do not speak for anybody. I do not speak for any community or anything. I speak for myself, and I think it's best if we all spoke for ourselves, because if we claim to speak for somebody else, you're taking away that person's space, their platform. They can speak for themselves. Adivasi women can speak for themselves, Dalit women can speak for themselves, Bahujan women can speak for themselves, queer folks can speak for themselves. So do not appropriate. If you are a good ally, make space so they can speak. Give them a platform so they can speak. They can voice their own thoughts, their own struggles, their own resistance. And that's the sort of thing that I go for in the book as well. So my aim is to not speak for others, right? So you could criticize me saying, why you're not saying this, why you're not saying that, because I only want to sort of platform this. Otherwise, I will not speak for anybody. So that's one of the ways I look at this book. So all the voices in this book, they all have various identities. So I'm not going to tell you this person's this caste, this person's this sexuality. Maybe for some person, these are different identities they don't want to talk about. Everybody does not foreground every identity that they have. Sometimes it might just be one of their many identities. So when you're reading my book, again, you need to not think about that as well. So yeah, having said that, I've made the book into 5 parts. One is I talk about beauty. One chapter is about beauty. One chapter is about love, relationships, consent, marriage, sex, and stuff. The third chapter is about women at work. Then the fourth one is about femininity, about demystifying the feminine. And the last one is about society, sanskar, and choice. So I'll just tell you a little bit about each of these chapters, and what was the sort of thought process that went into writing it. So the first one would be beauty. So when I looked at, I think this is something that all of us like to talk about, but also not to like, we do not like talking about it, because obviously the patriarchy has made this, they have a certain standardized idea of what beauty is. So if you do not conform to that idea of beauty, you're not beautiful, right? So there are 2 ways. So there are women who completely reject beauty because they think it's a completely patriarchal institution, which is absolutely great. But there are also women who sort of cherish the idea of beauty, who like to do themselves up, who like to dress up, who like to, do all that. So the thing is, like, it's not, the question is not about what is right and what is wrong. That's not what this chapter looks at. I'm just looking at how each woman views it individually, why she does what she does. Why do women wear saris? Why do women wear pants? Why do women, put sindoor on their forehead? Or like, why do women do all these things, right? So I wanted to, so I was asking these women who are these corporate like bosses, as to what they dress, like what do they wear to work. And it was very interesting because one of she's like the head of a Edelweiss finance management company. She's the only female head in the country, and she said that she wears a sari to work every day. So the reason behind that is, she says that she wears a sari because it's sort of like an idea rooted to the land, and she thinks that when she goes into any room in a sari and she's trying to raise capital, which is in the millions, people instinctively trust her. They respect her because she's wearing what is sort of, wedded to this land, right? So that's her view of why she wears a sari. And I speak to other corporate women who are sort of in the lower rung of the ladder, and they tell me that when they wear, like in cities like say Bangalore or Delhi or Mumbai, for instance, when they wear Indian clothes to work, they are sort of discouraged from doing that because then they look too traditional and they don't look professional enough. So they are made to, they're pushed to wear Western clothes because that's what's professional. Again, you all must know, you must have heard how in the courts, they said that knee-length skirts are not appropriate wear for lawyers, for women lawyers to wear to work. And again, like, so depending, and doctors have been telling me, I've interviewed doctors as well, and they said when they wear like red lipstick or when they wear Western clothes, they're not respected. So the patients don't respect them, other people don't respect them enough. Only when they wear Indian clothes, they're looked at as serious people. So it's like everybody has an opinion on what constitutes respectability and what doesn't. So every woman has to think about what she wears to work every day. Like every day she has to think about how she performs her womanhood, right? And is she going to be respected for that? How is she going to be treated? So I really was so fascinated by how every woman is so unique in how she thinks about why she's doing what she's doing. And it's not like she's just so she is really a thinking woman who understands how society perceives her, and she is spending time every day performing to achieve her goals. And that is the part that I was most interested in. How is she achieving the goal she's trying to achieve in any one of those moments, right? And that brings me to women who use their sexuality, capitalize from it, such as models or actors, or people who are in the glamour industries. So for me, just as I think many of you may have read Dr. Manjima Bhattacharjy's work, the book Mannequin, which is a great book, where she explores, how models capitalize, on what their work is, and she looks at it as work rather than looking at it as being objectified. So that is something that I'm very interested in, because when people self-objectify, when women are doing this, they're selling their bodies, pretty much. They're selling how they look. What goes on in their minds, and how do they feel exploited? Do they feel empowered? So that's something that I looked at as well. And it's so fascinating because so many women feel empowered by doing that. But obviously the industry is exploitative, because it's not letting them view themselves the way they want to be viewed. It's going through this narrow lens of what is beauty, and you have to sort of, so this is a fascinating, space which we need to look at. And I think I only touched the tip of the iceberg, really, because it's not the whole book. It's just one chapter in the book. But I've really looked at all these different sorts of women and what goes on in their minds while they do it. And the other important thing that I've looked at is queerness and performing queerness through our attire. I think that is another important thing that I've looked at is how does, Indian society treat women who dress in a sort of masculine way, and what does that do? How are they sort of completely marginalized just because they dress in a masculine way? The patriarchy hates that, right? They hate that. And they hate it when also women are too feminine for them and they're not feminine in the way that they want them to be feminine, like good feminine. It's like you're too sexualized, you're too sexual, then you're like, you're marked as a scarlet woman. And if you're like too masculine again, it's a problem. It's like you have to perform it in such a way that you don't like hurt the patriarchy's feelings, which is really, but women are really sort of shattering all these stereotypes, and that's amazing. So I think mostly I've interviewed millennial and Gen Z women for the book, and how they approach beauty and fashion is really fascinating. So that's that. And I've also looked at obviously the beauty myth, and looked at how these industries capitalize on our insecurities and all that sort of stuff, which is what a lot of feminist writing has already been done on that, which I also include, but that's not the only thing I look at. I'm trying to look at the other side of the coin as well. And another thing is about mental health, about how this continuous thing of being obsessed about our little freckles and our little pimples, what it does to our mental health, right? And there is so much, research to show how it really does affect our mental health, right? Women are just starving themselves. Women are, doing all these sorts of diets, and for what? And so I think the crux of the matter is you need to define what beauty is for yourself. It is not a standardized idea. Because there's another thing that I should tell you, that there was it's in the book, in this very remote place in Nicaragua, like they've not been exposed to mass culture at all. So they conducted this experiment to see how people's idea of beauty is formed, right? So to one group of people, they showed only like plus size women, and to the other group of people, they showed only thin, thin women. And in the end, when they were asked to draw the ideal beauty type, the first group drew rounder women and the second group drew thinner women. So it's all about how we are brainwashed into believing what beauty is. It really comes from, what we feel. So I think we need to redefine that, and women are doing that. So that's what the chapter on beauty is about. And the second chapter, which is about love, relationships, and consent. And I think there's a whole debate happening in India about marital rape right now, about criminalizing marital rape. And I just put up this one. I'm not a tweeter. I hardly tweet, but I put up this one tweet talking about it, and a whole troll army is just like going on and on and on, and men are so upset, like they're so scared. They're like, how can this be criminalized? Like they feel like all men are going to be in jail. I'm like, okay, why don't you talk about consent instead? Like, why can it not be that the conversation is about all of us talking about consent? It's like people get so scared. So I think consent is one of the important things in that chapter. In the Me Too movement, we saw how, it is so important to talk about consent. And a lot of what is ethical sex, what is unethical sex. I think these are all feminist conversations that need to be had, and like I just said to Shivani just before we started, very early, because sex education in India is hardly anything. I went to school in India. I know it's like the only things that they stress on is like when you're going to bleed, how much it'll hurt, possible pregnancies, sexually transmitted diseases, which are all important, but we don't talk about pleasure. We don't talk about what consent is. We don't talk about what good stuff is, good sex is. I think Paromita Vora, she writes so beautifully about this stuff, right? So she talks about how until you know what good sex is, what is pleasure, how are you going to say when it's, how do you know when it's bad? right? So you're just going to go through a lot of pain if you do not understand what is good, what you should be, what you should have, what you should expect. And that's the thing. It's like, this again, according to, I think the historian may or may not agree with me. Some historians that I've read have talked about how in pre-colonial India, we were much more open to talking about these sorts of things, and how British morality has really like taken away all our, our understanding of sexuality is so Victorian right now. We don't like to talk about anything because we think all that is like chichi, all that is like, too much taboo. In pre-colonial India, there was a little more flexibility to talk about this, but not that it was a great place, because even the Kama Sutra is mainly about male pleasure. It's not about women's pleasure. It was never about women's pleasure, right? So right now, the fact that we're talking about women's pleasure is a very important thing. And that's why for Me Too is very important. And that's why it's important to talk about marital rape, because we don't even think of that, like how it's like, they don't understand how when once a woman is married, because if she's like property, she should just be open to having sexual intercourse anytime of without her consent. That's not how it works. That's the whole thing about body politics. That is another important topic that I tackle in the book. How important it is for us to have the sort of freedom, the sort of thing to say no when we do not want to have sex, or we do not want to be touched. And that's such a hard thing to establish in a misogynistic society, where women are primarily seen as like tools of male pleasure. It's not about ourselves. It's always about male pleasure. So, which is a big problem. So for that to stop, to change that, it is so important for women to talk about consent, for women to talk about their own pleasure, and look at body politics in a different way, right? So I'm not looking at it only from the point of view of us women being sexually harassed, and that is very important, but it's also so important to talk about women's sexual pleasure. So I think there have been so many papers also talking about how we've framed this whole narrative through the lens of this whole victim lens of sexual harassment and violence, that we haven't looked at women's pleasure, because women's pleasure is also a place of power. When women cannot be shamed for their own for being sexual, for being these sexual beings, then that gives you a power in itself, because then you can be free, then you can just go and live in the world. So that's one of the main things I look at in that chapter. And another thing that I look at is about relationships, about queer relationships, about heterosexual relationships, and how these things sort of pan out. And relationships at the end of the day are so individual, so subjective. I think women have such different experiences. I've sort of tried to see what are the different experiences that women have, and all that in the book. And that is also very fascinating, because women are sort of really understanding how to tackle relationships, and that's very, very important. And another thing I think in that chapter that I've looked at would be, the other thing is about caste and about relationships, because in India often most love, relationships or marriage especially is intra-caste, right? It is still arranged. Even if it is not arranged, that is the interesting part, is that it's still sort of a caste experience, because you're still socializing and marrying in your caste, in your community, and it sort of just reimposes the same bounds that are there. So that's another thing that I look at in that chapter. And that's something that I have experienced myself as an intercaste woman with Dalit ancestry, is that caste is always there in the mix, right? So at the end of the day, people will look at you as impure, as somebody who is like an untouchable, as somebody that exists in the Indian dating scene. And that is something that I look at as well in that chapter, and about how it is so hard to come across sort of platforms to meet queer women in India. Like you have these sort of dating apps, very few dating apps, and obviously, although it's not criminal anymore in India to be homosexual, it's still not okay, right? It's still sort of looked upon as such a bizarre thing, and there are corrective rapes that happen in India, and queer women do not have the space to just go out there and look for a partner. So there's so much taboo about it, and we don't even talk about, obviously love is love, whether you're straight or whether you're queer. Love relationships don't always work out, but queer people do not even have the space to talk about these things, because it's not even okay to be queer yet. How do we talk about relationships that don't work, and so on and so forth. So that's something that chapter looks at. I'm sorry if I'm going too fast. I'm just like that sort of a person, to just stop me if you feel like I'm going too fast, and we can take a break and have a question.
It's fine. It's absolutely fine.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah. So that's the chapter about love, that I love and relationships that I have. And the next one, women at work, is another fascinating thing that I worked on, because for me, all women are working, right? Whether you're working at home, whether you're a mother, whether you're a homemaker, whether you're working in an office, whether you're working in wherever you're working, women are always working. The only question is, are we doing paid labor or unpaid labor? That's the only question here. So we cannot, I think that whole 90s way of boxing women as a housewife or like career woman, I think that's dated. I think we need to look at all women as working women, and find out how we can compensate all these women for all the work that they do. So even women who work in the office, it is so important to understand that women have all these other things they're working on: the emotional labor of relationships that they're handling, the emotional labor of childcare, the emotional labor of just having a family just exist, and then they're also doing all this work at the workplace. And not that workplaces are any show any understanding of any of these issues, because there is no flexibility in most workspaces. Gender pay gaps exist across the spectrum, which is something that I interviewed so many women. I was just like, oh my God, in these different fields, the pay gap is just so blatantly there, So there was this woman I interviewed. I'm sorry to go through this, but I'll come back to the larger thing. I just want to say about this woman, she works in the sort of technology. She started her own technological firm later, but in the beginning of her career, she was working in an office, and this guy and she were doing the same exact job, right? And he was married and she was single. And so when she went up to her boss and she found out that he was being paid more than her, twice as much as her, she goes up to the boss and asks him, why is he being paid more than me? And he said, you're single. He's a married man, so he has to provide for his family. And because you come from a sort of middle class background, you're taken care of, like, you have parents and everything. And that's the sort of the same work. And the thing is, so what she told me is that, so that's the lesson that she learned. And henceforth, going forward, she always negotiated for her salary. She always, so she told me the main thing is that women should negotiate. Women should just go up and ask for it. Like, don't expect the promotions to come on their own. Don't expect the salary to go up on its own. You need to go and ask for it. Like, that's the most important thing. Like, women should just go ask for it. So she really opened up my my brain about that. And I've been looking at it, and it's just bizarre just how women are paid less than men for the same jobs across all industries. You just, the statistical data is in the book. If you're interested in that, you could go look at it. And it's just the misogyny that exists in all industries. So this is another bizarre thing that I found. Even industries that are technically more liberal, like say humanities, or like even science, right, where we think gender is immaterial. Like, if you have the knowledge, if you have this, how can it be that, how can anybody discriminate against you? But even in these places, I found that gender bias exists, because it's a very male culture. So even if it is that you have the same knowledge in a male culture, they just promote men. They take men's ideas. And even if you have, so if in papers that have been written by men and women, they always sort of, even if the woman is the primary author, it's the man's name that goes first, right? It's called the Matilda effect. So they always appropriate. And women, so the economic, the World Economic Forum, they had this data about how women economists are not promoted. They are not hired because men disagree with their economic ideas. So they're not even included. So basically, they just cut you off right in the beginning because they don't agree with your ideas. And so it's, the bias exists everywhere. And I spoke to Dr. Soumya Sindhwani, who teaches at the Indian School of Business. And what she said, very fascinating to me, was that women should cherish their difference, and bring it to the table. So she said women are transformational, leaders, not transactional leaders. So she said that we have these largely different ideas, and it's important for you not to cut down your own ideas, but bring that idea to the table, right? You can transform the business, transform the institution, and women can do that. But constantly we are told that these ideas are not like rational, logical, or whatever. But when men make the same sort of illogical, irrational changes, then if the results are good, they're like, oh my God, he's this amazing leader, right? But women have to prove to so many people on every level to prove that an idea is logical because she's a woman. So these are the sort of things I was talking about, the femininity. Like they just assume that women equal to femininity, equal to irrational, equal to illogical, which is so bizarre. But these are this, and women spend so much time overthinking their question, overthinking what they did, but they're also intuitive. I think we should like play into these, into these aspects, because these are values. These are not things that we should like not look, like give up. These are things that we should cherish and like play up in the workplace. And that's another thing that an officer in the government told me, like who I interviewed for the book, about how for women to use their power is not easy right up. So if you have the same power as a man, for example, you have to prove every day that you're worthy of that power as a woman. So which means you have to prove every day that you're like sort of genderless. So you're not a woman. So you have to prove every day that, oh, I'm doing a man's work, I can do this work. So you have to sort of do that every day. And imagine how much, as it is, the work is a lot of pressure. There's so much load of the work. And then you have to prove every day that as a woman, you can do a man's work as well. So the pressures that women face at the workplace every day, like it's just the mental health issues that women face. It's not even, considered. So if a woman comes, woman or man or a person of any gender comes up to the workplace and says, oh my God, I can't do this work, they're just going to fire you or like whatever. There's no space for mental health. They're not talking about that. And that is another important thing that I look at in the book, constantly talking about mental health and how it's important for women to take care of their own brains if they want to smash the patriarchy. Because again, this is statistical data in the NCRB about how Indian women are 2 to 3 times more, they experience anxiety and all these depressive disorders more, because we're not even allowed to talk about it, right? So you have to internalize all your suffering, because Indian women, the best Indian woman is a woman who internalizes all her suffering and sort of is so perfect, right? And that's the problem. Like we need to talk about the problems as well of what it is to live every day. So that's something that I look at in the book as well. And talking about women's work in the house. So what is all the emotional labor that they do at home, motherhood, how hard it is for women to do that, and what are the things that they go through being mothers, right? So that's another thing that I've looked at in the book, and I put that in the women in work at work section, because that is also work. It's just not considered work because they're not paid for it. And the care work that women do, the amount of care work, I think especially in the pandemic, during the COVID, I think lockdowns, when everybody was stuck at home, I think that's when it became glaringly visible in many, many households that women did most of the work, right? Physically, like taking the plates, like the movie, The Great Indian Kitchen, or whatever that was called, like the Malayalam movie, how much women do all these things, and nobody considers them work, because it's just, and the woman might not even complain about doing it, because she just does it. And the physical toll it takes in her body, in her mind, how much she has to sort of go in the superwoman mode and like multitask all the time, the load that she takes, it's not talked about. And that is why mental health is so important to talk about. That's a beginning point, and that's when we start talking about that, we will get to all these different aspects. And yes, and again, I talk about other things like in the work chapter about sex work, about which again is work, which we need to look at in that way. We not just view it through the lens of violence. I think that is very important, to protect their rights, to protect sex workers' rights, and that's another thing that I look at in that chapter. And I think yes, I've also looked at how women's ambitions change very, very constantly. So it's not like the same ambitions you had when you were 20 will be the same ambitions that you have when you're 30. Things change, opportunities will come. So it's about how women can individually use this, the change in a positive manner. Um, and the next chapter, which is about femininity, like I said, demystifying the feminine, it's to look at what femininity means to different women, right? And femininity is not just for women, like I said. So it's about how we can perform it, we can reject it, we can cherish it. It is up. It's a choice. It's an individual choice, like how we want to view what femininity is to every person. So I think some of the interesting things that came out in that chapter to me was about caste and femininity, the intersections of that, how because of like all the scriptures that we have, which in India it's coded how different women from different races and castes have to perform different versions of femininity, which is very interesting, because that makes all our struggles so individual. Because depending on your community or your family or where you're from, the expectations of you as a woman is it's different. It's similar, but there are sort of there's differences, and I think that's something that we need to look at. And that, so I've spoken to different women about what it means to them, how they view femininity, and for queer folks as well, how femininity is a site of vulnerability. For me, I'm a bisexual woman, and for me, for most of my life, I thought femininity was equal to like this sort of inferior, vulnerable things that I didn't want, because I wanted to be powerful, I wanted to be strong in this patriarchal world. So I suppressed my femininity as much as I could, and then finally I was more masculine. For most of my life I've been more masculine, but then I realized suddenly, I'm also a mother, and I'm also being bisexual, you experience relationships with men and women, and I've realized that femininity is like a constantly transforming sort of a thing. It's not like it's just one thing and it'll be the same. It is a very beautiful, it's a very it's like it's this beautiful intuitive thing that allows you to change as a person. And I think once I sort of let my femininity blossom inside me, I think I was able to experience life in a very sort of colorful way. And I think that's something that's important for all of us, to look at what femininity is within us, to reject it or cherish it, but to like explore what that means, because patriarchy has coded it to be a certain way, which isn't always the case. So that's what that chapter is about. And the last one is about choice and what that means in India, because oftentimes I think a woman who does not use the tag of feminism is pigeonholed as like this sort of feminist fail, who has to be it means like if you're traditional, you're not, you can't, it's like you're not into women's empowerment, which is so bizarre because India is so large, and I think right now India is so ideologically diverse, like we don't all agree on the same ideologies. So I don't couple feminism with any one ideology, and that's why I call it post-feminist. Shibani had pointed out in the beginning. So in the post-feminist way that I look at it, I do not couple feminism with any one ism. It's not Marxism, it's not liberalism, it's not any one ism, right? So we can all be feminists and have different various ideologies. You could not even be feminist, don't call yourself feminist, but you could be a post-feminist and still be using whatever ideology. So I think that's what I look at in the last chapter, about how we can all be ideologically so different from each other, but it's important for us to come together and at least talk to each other, right? And to respect each other's choices. So I think this comes to me from like my own experience of my family, because in my family, like the women, you might, like my mother and my aunts and everybody, you look at them, you think they're such traditional women because they're wearing saris and they're perpetuating these fasts and they're very religious and all that sort of thing. But that doesn't mean they're not modern. That doesn't mean they're not active women who are participating in society and contributing in ways that they find important. So modernity and tradition are not these mutually exclusive things. I think it's up to each person to understand what that means to them, and that's what I look at in that last chapter about choice, about every woman's choice. And that also comes to faith, I think it's so important for us to, it's not that feminism equals atheism. You could be a Muslim feminist, you could be a Hindu feminist, you could be a Christian feminist. So I also explored what it means, what the interrelationship of faith and feminism is, right? So I think that's another reason in India, like feminism is rejected by so many, because they've automatically assumed feminism equals to so and so ideology, or atheism, for instance. I think that again is a very individual, subjective opinion, and we should learn to respect each other, right? So it does not mean that if a person is religious, they belong to any one faith, that makes them just because of that regressive. I think that is just sort of pushing away so many sisters. Like, what sort of how can we collaborate? How can we sort of form a consensus with our sisters, with other women, if you're going to reject so many women as feminist fails right at the get-go? Like, where is that community going to come from? Like, what community are we talking about, right? So if feminism is for all women, we need to learn to expand the definition of feminism. And that's what post-feminism is about to me. It's about looking at the multiple ways of being a feminist, and how women from different communities, different castes, different positionalities, how they smash the patriarchy. So I think that's what that last chapter was about. So I think I've really sort of made a crux of everything for you now, and I would really love to have some questions and start any like a discussion, because you should read the book, so I think if I tell you more about the book, I can just go on and on, because I'm like, oh my god, I wrote this but it'll be great if we can now have a conversation. Any questions, we can discuss it.
So I would request people to type their questions in the chat box, because I don't think we can unmute everybody. But if you could post your questions in the chat box. But if somebody wants, maybe we can try. Is that possible? Can the host unmute the person? I think so.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so if somebody wants to ask a question, please do let us know. Otherwise, please write your questions in the chat box.
I think someone had raised a hand in between.
Student volunteers, can you figure out if somebody
Yeah, please check that. There was someone who had raised the hand.
I'll just sort of ask a few questions just to sort of start the whole process.
There's a question.
Just to sort of or I think somebody has asked a question. Yeah, if I could just sort of get the whole thing rolling. I think you use a phrase which you did not sort of talk about it right now, which I found very interesting: female masculinity. Could you sort of talk a little bit about that, because I found that sort of interesting. So what do you mean by female masculinity?
I'm glad you asked that question because that's something that I spent so much time to put that phrase together. So this is I do research right now in queer studies. So it is so important to sort of define these things for ourselves to see what they mean. So this is how I look at it, right? So like I said, gender is a spectrum, sexuality is a spectrum, but obviously we are all born with certain genitalia. Right. So and society marks us as male or female. Right. So it does not mean that if you have a particular genitalia, you have to live your life as a man or a woman. Right. So female masculinity for me is those who are born with female genitalia and who may be more masculine than they are feminine. So what does that constitute? So for most of my life, I was very dysphoric to start with. So I think in my teenage years, I probably did not want to be a girl or a woman, and that shifted for me later. And for some people, that does not shift. So they have to transition to affirm their gender identities to whatever their gender identity is. So that's what I wanted to explore, to call it female masculinity, because sometimes it could lead to you leading a trans life, because if you do not feel at all one with yourself. But for some people like me, for instance, it could lead to something like where I am right now, where I'm a queer person, but I identify as a woman, right? So that female masculinity is to talk about that experience is what I wanted to do, and also expand it. So just after I in the book, there is an interview with a non-binary person, just after I spoke about that, because for that person who was born as female, later on not transition, but identifies as a non-binary person, right? So this is something that's like a stepping stone that could lead to so many ways of looking at yourself. And yes, that is what I wanted. So, and that is also to affirm the idea that we are all sort of queer, in a sense, that we all have our masculinities and femininities. So it's so important to sort of explore that. I think that's where that term comes from.
I think it's interesting because I think right now we do not necessarily have the language to talk about different identities. So it's interesting that you're doing this, at least evolving a language, which of course then that, because it's through language we expressing, through language we become. So I think it's interesting that and important to sort of have new vocabulary to express these new ideas, new issues. Yes, I think we have questions. If Ishika or whosoever can sort of take over.
Yes, ma'am, I'll take over. So the first question is by Manasvi. Do you think we would have been much ahead in the area of gender equality without the intrusion of Britishers?
That's like a very double-edged question, like a sword that could like slay me either way, whatever I say. But yeah, that's a very because we cannot speculate, because history is such that things happen, things happen, things happen. We cannot say that for sure, because it's not that before the British came, India was like a perfectly gender equal world either. So like I said, it was lot more. There was a lot more space for women to explore, women and men to explore their sexuality, because I've been reading a lot about this, right? So for my research, and I've found that it's fascinating, because the British found Indian women to be more masculine and Indian men to be more feminine, right? Because they were going by their Victorian standards of what it means to be a man and woman. And now in the like among brown and black scholars in the West, to decolonize what we call gender and sexuality, we are really looking at how the British really did define man and woman as these sort of binaries that did not exist in other cultures. So we cannot really, especially in African cultures, which is what they say, that sort of thing did not exist. We cannot say that that's true in India as well, that men and women did not exist before the British came. Obviously, men and women, the idea existed in India before the British came, but there was a lot more space to how we could perform our gender, right? So men could, if you see in all pre-British, in the pre-British era, men and women both wore jewelry. We all dressed up. We all wore coal in our eyes, so it was not like, you're more feminine or more masculine because you dressed a particular way. So women rode horses, women fought wars. So in India, all those things did happen. So I don't want to speculate. I think Dr. Saeed Mubin Zera could probably answer this question better than I, speculate about, whether India would have been more gender equal without the British, because the British did bring a lot of other things, not to say that it's great that the British came to India or anything. Of course not. Colonialism is a horrible thing, but certain ideas that came to us, in that understanding through English to us. So we cannot discount how, things are shaped. So I don't think there's one way answer to that. Dr. Said, if you would like to add something.
Yes, Sindhuji. Yeah, you're right. In fact, no society is ideal. The quest to keep working on to get change for a better society or a better world for everybody, every being or every gender, you can say. I think that's what an ideal society can be. Just for the knowledge of the students, the greatest hashtag line for Women International Year 2022 is, I'll just mention because it's connected with this. It's called Break the Bias. Yeah. So I think you don't need to be in any box to break the bias. You need to just identify that bias. So probably I think history is as it happens, right? So it's how we learn from our history. And I would definitely agree with Sindhu that yes, colonialism is not good, and it is not associated with any goodness or any good things that came our way. So that's a different story and a different perspective that maybe we could have a lecture on it later on by some expert. But yes, I agree that you know uh, we have to keep on working and keep on fighting to hashtag break the bias.
Thank you, ma'am. Sindhu. Ma'am, how would you draw a thin line between feminist notions of Gen Z and millennials, as I guess most of them are quite similarly abstract to each other? And he loved your idea to include Gen Z people.
Thanks, Satyendu. I think so. To me, the way I see, not in, obviously Gen Z and millennial are based on the ages, right? Like in which year you were born. So millennials are so to so age. I'm not really sure what exact year that is. You could look that up. But to me, I think the difference that I see between millennials and Gen Z, I'm a millennial. So I think Gen Z are like way ahead of us in so many things, and that's amazing. That's like I'm like constantly learning from Gen Z, right? Like how fearless they are, like all these sort of taboos and these sort of things that we've used to like put ourselves in a box. I think Gen Z does not have that. Like they just speak their mind. They could be politically incorrect, whatever, but they just speak their mind. And that sort of fearlessness I never had. Like, I would think, oh my God, what would this person think, or what would that person think, what would my institution think, or so many things that I would think about. But I think Gen Z does not have that fear. That's one thing. And the other thing about Gen Z is that I think they're a lot more, their idea of gender has expanded a lot thanks to queer theory and thanks to the LGBTQIA movement that's happened in India. I think among Gen Z, gender is a lot more open than it was for millennials. I think as a millennial queer person, like you had to like really think. It was very hard for me growing up in India. Like at that time, it was illegal in India to be queer at that time, right? So as for me growing up, so I think for Gen Zs, their ideas they're a lot more open because of the fact that they've been brought up at a time when it was more open. So I think that's something that I'm very excited about the Gen Z generation, because they're going to break more taboos, break more stereotypes and biases than the millennial population.
Please do post more questions. I'm sure there are more questions. Please do type questions in the chat box. And again, while you do so, would you elaborate a little bit more on this concept of post-feminism? Because as somebody that, who's way, way older and who still sort of, thinks that, are we even feminists to sort of talk about post-feminism? Huh? So, how does one look at that? Because, of course, you in your book, you do talk about how there is a certain kind of negativity which is associated with, using this phrase post-feminist or post-feminism, and how, you redefine it, or you look at it post-feminism in a slightly different way. So if you could elaborate on that, please. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, you're right. In the Anglo-American circles, the word post-feminist is largely negative. It has a negative connotation. It refers to sort of women, women who sort of capitalize on their sexuality and who like Sex and the City. Basically, if you watch Sex and the City or like that, yeah. So it's basically women like that who constitute post-feminism according to the West, and that's how they theorized it. And they think of it as, some people even think post-feminist is anti-feminist, but a lot of theorists have rejected that definition, and they have looked at post-feminism as something that takes into account all these different posts, like post-structuralism, post-colonialism, post-modernism, to sort of question how this first, second, waves of feminism in the West, to question what that was and to sort of make sense of it in a more contemporary sort of a way. So the way I look at post-feminism, primarily for me, is to make it more individual. Obviously, feminist struggles, women's struggles are collective, but we are at a place right now where we're even questioning what is collective, right? So based on your own positionality in society, you would have a different issue. So what issue makes a collective issue is something that not any one of us can decide. So this book looks at individual struggles, individual women's struggles, and that's why I call it post-feminist, to look at the different ways of being a feminist, not to just use any one definition. So yeah, so that is the main crux of it for me. And the other thing is to de-link it from other totalizing theories. So because you're into theory, and I'm sure a lot of students here like to read theory as well, it's very important to understand that the post is basically to question any one totalizing theory, right? So you can't say that you can look at any one issue or any one person's life and be like, this one theory explains everything. There is no such theory. We have to sort of look at different theories and mix and match to make sense of anything in the world, because everything is so complex, everything is so complicated and messy. Nothing is going to fit into any one box, right? So that's what post-feminism does. It looks at everything in a very in a larger way. It's complex, so you have to use these many different filters to look at the world, and that's what I do. So I look at everything in many different filters, and that's what post-feminism is about. And that also expands, I think, the thing that, because we have a very restrictive way in the feminist discourse of defining who a feminist is, and if you do not comply with all those A, B, C, D, E, F, G, then you're like, oh, you're not a feminist, you're a feminist fail, anti-feminist, whatever. I don't think that helps. I think for us to come together as women, I think it's important to expand what feminism is, and that's what post-feminism is for me.
There are questions, but just because it leads up to what you're talking about, you also talk about, the hyperreal underpinnings of post-feminism in your book, how post-feminism travels almost transnationally in cyberspace. And you talk about, virtual bodies as sites of dissent. But the virtual space is also a predatory space, as we have seen, especially in what has happened recently with Bulibai and, other, this is just something which has happened very recently. So how does feminism work in that kind and use that space still as a space of dissent, as a space to register dissent? How does it sort of work? How do you still sort of, use that? Because the space at times seems to be more predatory, more threatening, and one becomes afraid to use that space.
So this is something that I've been thinking about a lot as well. So one way of looking at it for me is that I think cyberspace is a reflection of society as well. So a lot of things that people might be scared to say, maybe to you in person, they will say in cyberspace because they're like anonymous there, right? So cyberspace reflects all our darkest, all our, the most horrible parts of our society. So I think that's like a reflection. And the fact that women are bold enough to be in that space and to sort of resist all this and to sort of talk back to and give back to all these trolls, that as they do. I mean, even in Bulibai, the number of women who have been targeted, the way they've come out and spoken about it on Twitter, they've given it back, and they're standing up for themselves. I think that is what I'm talking about. That is how women are smashing the patriarchy, in the sense that we are standing up and talking for ourselves now. And cyberspace is that space where we can do that, whether we are anonymous or whether we are putting our faces out there, like what you said, like bodies of dissent, like virtual bodies of dissent. I think that is what it is. Like the traditional way has been to like go picket and like go on the roads and like, go fight for your right, which is great, which is a great way of doing it. But again, this is another way of doing it, that we're using our virtual, because all women might not have the freedom to even go on the roads, and their families might not allow them. They might have their own reasons for why they can't go. But the digital world is a place where all of us can, not all of us, of course, but we can, in a larger sense, we can just go out there and put our views forward. So yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Thank you. Ishika, you can take up the other questions, please.
Oh, I see one. How a woman cannot be a feminist. I think that's what I just said. That that's something that I do not do in my book. I do not look at how women are not feminists. I'm only looking at how women are feminists because I don't see how it helps us. Honestly, it's like if you're going to spend our time, stabbing each other on the back or in the front or wherever, saying you're not a feminist, you're not a feminist, you're not a feminist. Okay, but what does that do? How is that helping us? So I don't do that.
Uh, yeah, ma'am. I think there are a few more questions, so I'll take up those. There's a question from Ishika. Ma'am, how can we bring about a change in our daily lives to make the world more gender neutral, which identifies and addresses people from all genders and sexes? Like starting with a small change by using more gender neutral pronouns, such as they instead of he or she.
Yeah, I think that's very important, right? So because we don't know whether what a person identifies as, what their pronouns are. So if you do not know, and if you're doubtful, you could always use they. This is something I teach my daughter who is 5 years old. I tell her, if you do not know, she'll tell me this person looks like a man but dressed like a woman or whatever. Then I'll say, just say they till you figure out, what they would like to be referred to as. Just use they. Yeah, I think that is very important. That's a great way to start. And I think it's so again, like I said, with sex education, it's also so important to talk about gender equality and queerness at a much earlier stage with children. It's not to like, so I think the biggest fear that society has is that, oh my god, why should we talk about this to children early? What if we make them queer? You cannot make anyone queer. It's just something that either you are, or you're not explored yourself enough. That's how I like to see it. So it's like, you can't make anyone queer by just talking to them about it. It's just to make them feel that nothing they feel is wrong. What they feel about themselves is true. So each of our truths is true only to ourselves. So I think it's important to start those lessons early and to diversify, and yes, use pronouns like they till you know for sure what that person would like to be referred to as. And this is something, like I said, with Gen Z, this is happening a lot more. Like with the millennial generation, this was not something that was open to us. Like we didn't talk about these sort of things. So I think Gen Z is talking about these things. That's a big step ahead as well.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is from Konika Singh. She says, first of all, thank you, ma'am. My question is that why are the females of our own society not believing or supporting each other? How can I change that mentality on my very own?
Oh my God, that's a hard question. It's like, I think even in the Me Too movement, we saw just after Me Too, there was this hashtag called Believe Women, because it was like, no, women would not believe women. We would always suspect, the other women, of what are her motives, like what is she trying to get at, like, and yeah, and I mean, we have to own up to the fact that women don't necessarily like each other. Like, it's not like just because we're all women, we're like, oh, we all love each other. That does not happen. So it's something that we need to cultivate. We need to, if we want to form an alliance with each other, it's important to respect. And that's why I think the basis for me is to respect another woman's choice, respect where she comes from, respect her respect her opinion. We need to learn to respect and just talk. And I think here's an important place for me to say that I would I'm not going to tell you what my ideologies are or my political stances, but I have friends who have the exact opposite ideology or political stance, and I've been able to keep those relationships alive even in this era. I think is because I still sit and talk to them about it. I don't rage to start off. Like, that's not what's going to bring us together. We need to be able to talk in a civil way. Like if you're not going to even, so if you're saying, oh, that person is so and so, supports so and so, or looks so and so, or dresses in a particular way, so I cannot talk to that woman because she's probably this and this sort of way we judge each other needs to stop. I think if we need to form alliances, we need to talk. We might disagree, but we might agree on some things too. So I think it's so important for us to talk, and I know it's hard, especially in today's world, but yeah, we need to do that.
If anybody has any question, quickly type. Otherwise, I think we can move towards a closing of the talk. If anybody has a question, quickly type. Otherwise, Ishika, you can then invite Mobin ma'am for the vote of thanks. Ishika cannot unmute herself.
Yes, ma'am. I think she cannot unmute herself. Okay, so since we have no other questions, I think we can move on to the closing. I would like to invite Dr. Syed Nobin Sarah to please give the closing speech and say a few words. Ma'am.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. On behalf of Atmaram Sanatan Dharm College, the English Association of the Department of English, in collaboration with the Women Development Cell of ARSD College, for organizing this talk. We are thankful to Sindhu Rajasekaran ji, for this great enigmatic talk on her book, which also not only she gave a great introduction to the various points that she has raised in her book, which are very pertinent and very important points, keeping in mind women's empowerment and women's emancipation. Her book entitled Smashing the Patriarchy, Exploring the Psyche of the Modern Indian Women. Thank you, Sindhuji. You very nicely spoke about beauty, love, relationships, women and work, and also the various pending issues that women are facing in current scenario. I think I personally felt that an issue like you. I would want to maybe meet you and speak to you and maybe know more about how ideological how ideology it becomes a speed breaker for women empowerment across ideologies. So maybe minority ideology, because if you go and see the religion, there's nothing as such, no discrimination. But then by the time it comes to the dining table of the women, it is served with discrimination and bias. That is why the UN has decided to have break the bias, this hashtag break the bias 2022. Now, having said that, सिंधु जी, मुझे एक शेर याद आ रहा है. आई एम फॉरगेटिंग द शायर, बट वो शेर इसलिए याद आ रहा है कि from the late 19th century to the 21st century, that we have from the suffrage movement to the Me Too movement to post-COVID and COVID movement and the kind of women activism that we've been part of. And still we don't see the light, but we are just aiming for the light. So but the catch is that we have people like Sindhu who are talking and writing and fearlessly speaking about these issues and how women movement is becoming important. Despite all the work, the struggle is, I think, very minuscule. So we need to keep on working. So thinking of this and your work that you have done, मुझे एक शेर याद आ रहा है. I hope I make sense, and if you don't understand, I'll explain it to you. शेर ऐसा है कि इन्हीं पत्थरों पे चल के अगर आ सको तो आओ, इन्हीं पत्थरों पे चल के अगर आ सको तो आओ, मेरे घर के रास्ते में कोई कहकशा नहीं है. कहकशा as in galaxy. You have to walk through all these stones, you know, you have to get those pains in your feet to reach to the destination. So I think this explains the kind of struggle women like you are talking about and writing about. Now, having said that, I would like to thank Sindhu ji for taking time out, and above all, I would like to thank our principal sir. You know, I want to mention this here, Sindhu, that he is always so supportive and so open to ideas, and he's always, we just have to take an issue to him or a topic to him, and he's always open, he's supportive. So an immense support of our principal sir, Professor Gyantosh Kumar Jha, for making this happen and giving us that kind of support, his motivation. And along with that, I would like to thank convener Shibani Pukan ma'am. She's the convener of Women Development Cell also, and I think the English Association also, the seminar. Okay, so thank you, Shibani, for making this happen. And along with that, Sindhu, I have noted down, if I've missed any of my colleagues, please excuse me. I would like to thank Dr. Shubha Dwivedi, Guru Vandana ji, Dr. Manisha, Dr. Rashmi Behel, Dr. Manjula Shirotkar, Dr. Nidhi Dureja, Konika, Dr. Achinglu, Dr. Prerna, Dr. Priyanka, Dr. Rosie Sinha, Dr. Swati, and if I have missed anybody, I'm sorry. And above all, I would like to thank our Man Friday, Dr. Ravinder Pant, who's always there. Without him, it's not possible for us to he's like, we know if he's there, everything is going to go smooth. And thank you to all the students, and also, like Shibani had mentioned, that we have some of our colleagues and some of our friends from other colleges. So thank you for them to come and be part of this enlightening lecture. And I would conclude with Maya Angelou, and this is for us all women, that I am a woman, phenomenal women. That's me. So that's to us all women. And thank you all. I hope I'm not missing anybody, Shibani. Thank you all
No, I
for.
don't think so. And if we are, I'm sure they'll understand and forgive us for our sins.
Yeah. And thank you, students, for coming and being part of this. It's very nice that you guys are always actively involved. And thank you all for this session. Thank you.
Thank
बहुत
you.
बहुत शुक्रिया.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, before we leave, can we